أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Maurice Salah Khan. I am pleased to be your host, once again coming to you through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Our topic for today is it's going to be a thought-provoking topic. There's a race in one of the most important cities in the world, New York City, the Big Apple, that's been heating up. And there are two front runners who have generated a bit of controversy of late as a result of their response to what took place in occupied Palestine. One is an Asian American, Andrew Yang. The other is an African American, Eric Adams. Our topic for today is a focus on the candidacy of Eric Adams. In fact, the title is New York Mayoral Candidate Eric Adams in Focus. Now, I'm sure that some of you may be wondering why just focusing on Eric Adams. Actually, this is a topic that we were planning to have a couple of months ago. We began thinking about this topic a couple of months ago because of the nature of this race that's unfolding in New York City, and against the backdrop of this nationwide resurgence of awareness around issues of justice and what have you, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the fact that Eric Adams is a former police executive. He was a captain in the NYPD. And so I reached out to my friend, Ron Hampton, one of the guests for today's program, a couple of months ago. And I said, I asked him, first of all, did he know Eric Adams personally? And then, what his thoughts were about us doing the program, having a discussion about him, his candidacy, and what then his candidacy portended for real substantive change, not only in New York City, but because New York City has is a trendsetter, so to speak, politically, what the impact might be for this movement towards more awareness and more reform nationwide. So, and that was before the controversy unfolded around Palestine, and we'll get to that later. But for now, let me introduce our guests. Our first of all, our guests for this conversation are two committed Black brothers. Two committed Black brothers with years of experience, years of service in the law enforcement community. Ron Hampton and Damon Jones, they both have extensive resumes, so for the sake of time, I will reference the parts of their resumes that are directly relevant to our subject matter for today. Ronald E. Hampton retired from the DC Metropolitan Police Department after 23 years of service as a community relations officer. He is both remembered and respected for his outstanding work with the citizens of the 3rd Police District in Washington, D.C., in crime prevention and community participation and relations. His extensive experience and knowledge in community relations and policing has resulted in education and training opportunities for Mr. Hampton locally, nationally, and internationally. Ron Hampton is the immediate past executive director of the National Black Police Association, Incorporated, and presently serves as the Washington, D.C. representative for Blacks in Law Enforcement of America. Additionally, he serves as a law enforcement fellow at the University of the District of Columbia's Institute for Public Safety and Justice. Damon K. Jones is a 30-year veteran of the Westchester County Department of Corrections. He has served 13 years as a union delegate for the Westchester County Correction Officers Benevolent Association, or COBA, and has participated in the contract negotiation, welfare fund, and labor management committees. Mr. Jones is currently the New York State representative of Blacks in Law Enforcement of America. From 2006 to 2010, he served as the Northeast Region President of the National Black Police Association. He also served as a national board member and chair of the National Membership Committee of the National Black Police Association. Mr. Jones is also a member of the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice. With his leadership, Blacks in Law Enforcement of America have been strong advocates for law enforcement and community relations. Now, again, there is much more to both of these resumes. We will share them in their entirety in a subsequent release to this broadcast, inshallah, God willing. For now, let us simply note the fact that we have two well-qualified professionals for today's conversation. And on that note, I want to say welcome to the conversation, my brothers.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ron, you and I, we go back years, bro. We go back years. In fact, we go back all the way to the days of the advocacy around the wrongful imprisonment, in the opinion of many, of Terrence Johnson. And then there were many other challenges and cases and issues that you and I were shoulder to shoulder on since that precedent-setting case unfolded in the Washington, D.C. area. I reached out to you because of that long relationship, and my first question to you was if you knew Eric Adams, and your response was in the affirmative. And my understanding is that Mr. Jones, Damon Jones, also knows Eric Adams personally, and so we want to begin there. Your relationship, your knowledge of Eric Adams, the former police officer, I believe he was a captain at the NYPD, and your knowledge of him as a politician. Let's begin with you, Brother Ron.
Well, thank you very much for having me, my brother. And it's good, always good to see you. And you're right, we go way back, and I think to me that's a testament to how long we've been doing this work and the necessity of it. Yeah, but I've known Eric, and I've had the pleasure of meeting him a long time ago, and along his career, he was very sharp. He was also the president and founder, I believe, of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement in New York, and a very similar organization to the National Black Police Association, although it was local in nature. But Eric quickly rose to be a national voice as it relates to these issues and its impact on African Americans and communities of African Americans. So, and so I wasn't surprised. He was a president of one of the boroughs in New York, I think it was Brooklyn. He is now running for mayor. Eric was always very knowledgeable, very much into what it was that he was doing, and very much a politician in terms of handling the issues and things. So again, I say, I'm not surprised that he's is a front runner in the position for mayor of New York City. I wish him all the luck in the world, and I think that also sends quite a message. We've only had a few people in the history of law enforcement and corrections, because Ben Ward came from corrections in New York, who have gone through their careers and then became successful politicians. And the one that comes to mind that we all know is Lee P. Brown, who started off in on the West Coast and then ultimately in Houston, New York, and went back home, become mayor, and all of that. And so I see Eric in that sort of light.
And you, Brother Damon Jones, your thoughts?
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I think we will have a great conversation. As far as Eric, I've known Eric my whole law enforcement career, and as Ron said, I met Eric through law enforcement activism. Eric was someone that was always outspoken, someone that always addressed the issues. And I think, just like Ron said, I think Eric was the prototype for other young Black officers to try to get into politics. Because being in law enforcement, you realize that the only way you're going to kind of make some change is through legislation and policy. And I think Eric saw that, and he moved into politics and got the support and showed a lot of brothers and sisters how to address the issues publicly, and being vocal publicly. So you know, we support Eric. You know, a lot of the Black officers, the majority of Black officers, they already announced that they support Eric in his candidacy for mayor. And we believe that Eric will do the right thing in office, especially for public safety in dealing with the police departments and the correctional departments.
Okay, on that note now, it's very clear that both of you are supporters of his candidacy. That's what it comes across to me as. And inshallah, before the broadcast ends, we're going to have to kind of wade into a challenging area for him and us, especially those of us who are supportive of his candidacy, a rather prickly area. But before we do, I'd like to get your thoughts on what you expect should he become mayor. What do you expect the impact of his mayoralship would be on the climate as it exists in America right now around issues of policing and accountability? Again, let's begin with you, Ron.
Well, my brother, I think it's going to be difficult. There's already some changes that have come down in New York City. For example, issues regarding collective bargaining and the union's involvement in certain parts of the police department when it comes to behavior and other things. There are also the officers in corrections and policing jobs will have their discipline records online. There's some reforms that have taken place as a result of what happened, and now that Eric is running, and someone who has been there, and also someone who's been very much aware of some of the traditional cultural stuff that has happened in policing, I can see him being an advocate, a continued advocate of the kind of things that have taken place, and the possibility of even more reform coming in as a result of it. He'll be in a position where he can not only come up with new reforms, but also get those reforms done. I also think that we will probably see some strong Black leadership policing in the city.
Exactly.
strong black leadership in corrections and in the fire department in the city as a result of his leadership. Because again, Damon and I know this above all, that the mayor is responsible for the selection and the hiring of the leadership of those departments. And so I expect Eric to be strongly involved in that process as it relates to the selection of those individuals that's going to be there. And I just feel like he's going to have and should have something to say. I know if I was the mayor of New York, or if I was the mayor of Washington, D.C., and in light of the things that's going on in our public safety departments, I'm going to be involved in that process because I have expectations. I have expectations of what it is that I want.
Mr. Jones.
I think what's going to be very unique about Eric being mayor is that you're going to have a black man that came up through the ranks in NYPD. And not only that, I think what would be more important, and Ron mentions it, his resources and people power, and knowing people that are outspoken and understand the need of proper public safety and police reform. A lot of times we see politicians hire friends and family discount, where they put people in place that shouldn't be in those positions, and then we wonder why we don't see the actual change that's needed through police departments and through public safety. But I believe that Eric understands and he knows the right people to put in place, the right people of color, not just because they're black, but because they have the experience and they have the know-how to change policies, procedures, and training through public safety, through corrections, through probation, and actually make public safety work for the people.
Okay, now here comes the tough question on the controversy that erupted after Mr. Adams and Mr. Yang took positions that were very disappointing to a large block of their support in New York City. During the recent crimes against humanity, once again committed by the state of Israel against the people that and the land that they occupy, Andrew Yang was the first that came out with a tweet that said, quote, "I'm standing with the people of Israel who are coming under bombardment attacks and condemn the Hamas terrorists. The people of NYC, of New York City, will always stand with our brothers and sisters in Israel who face down terrorism and persevere." All right. Right after that, shortly after that tweet was released, the Adams campaign came out with their own. Today on Jerusalem, Israel came under attack from Hamas-fired rockets in Gaza. Israelis live under the constant threat of terrorism and war, and New York City's bond with Israel remains unbreakable. I stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Israel during this time of crisis. Now, this, understandably, was very, very problematic for not only a large swath of the Muslim community in New York City, but also conscious folk within the African American community also registered their criticisms. My own thoughts were initially, why did either one of these front runners have to weigh in on that at all? Why weren't they just silent on it? Just say nothing. But they both made a statement. My understanding is that Yang kind of, partially walked his back, partially, but uh, Eric Adams, his campaign attributed the tweet to a subordinate within their campaign, but didn't apologize for it, didn't take it down. And then later, Eric Adams, during the course of an interview with a Jewish radio program, he took the sense of solidarity with Israel and with the Jewish community, but more importantly with Israel. You know, he kind of deepened it. And again, this is something that for many, especially given what just took place in Palestine again, in occupied Palestine again, was very, very problematic, and understandably so. We have that element of this controversy that I'd like for the two of you to give your opinion on. But the other side, there's another side to this as well. You both are well aware of the fact that Israel has a training relationship with police departments in the United States all throughout this country. In fact, there are many, many departments that annually go to the state to the state of Israel, and they get training. And in fact, that reprehensible technique that was used against George Floyd in Minnesota is one that is routinely used. There are many photos and videos of it being used in the state of Israel by the by police and by IDF soldiers against an occupied people called Palestinians. Again, this has become an issue that is very problematic for many, not all, but many of the Muslims in New York City, and for some of the conscious folk who are concerned about what's been going on in that occupied land outside of the Muslim community. What are your thoughts on this controversy and the potential impact that it could have on this mayoral race?
Yeah.
Ron.
Well, I want to be clear, and I have talked about this in the past, and I think that we have been clear about opposing those training techniques that police departments in this country utilize, and as well as the training that they spend in Israel along with those forces. There's a belief in U.S. law enforcement that the strategies and the techniques that they use there are some of the best in the world when it comes to terrorists and other related incidents. So our departments use that. I know here in Washington, D.C., there have been police officers that have gone to Israel to train. Frankly, I'm opposed to that. I think that there's something wrong with that. And those countries have not demonstrated any best practices when it comes to the issues that law enforcement had to deal with. You know, I would like to see them go to the UK, a place where they don't use guns and they use strategies that are much more humane as it relates to law enforcement. As a matter of fact, there was an article, there was a program on TV today on Sunday morning talking about, and in comparison, showing strategies used in countries like the UK and Germany versus the US. And so I want to be clear, I'm opposed to that, and I think that's the wrong thing to do. As it relates to that relationship, I think that the UN and other human rights organizations have raised the issues as it relates to the treatment of Palestinians from the Israelis as it relates to the Gaza and other situations over there. And being a human rights activist myself and one who sides with that, it raises concerns in my head and in my heart also. It's really strange, but you also must know, and I know that both of you do, that New York has a significant Jewish population, not only in terms of there's several sects of Jews that live in the city, and they've been very powerful in the city, and I'm acknowledging that because that has been the reality. They've been as a very powerful group as it relates to a lot of the issues. I also relate to that community when I talk about community control of the police. You know, the police can't go into the Jewish community without permission from the Jewish community. They just can't go in there and police. And when it comes to the issues that's related to what the police will do in that community, it gets done through negotiation and conversation. So Eric must be aware of all of that. And like we have talked about before, this guy didn't get to where he is today and not being aware of all of those issues, however sensitive they may be.
Damon Jones, you want to weigh in on it?
Yes, sir, brother. I definitely do. First, I am against any oppression of any people.
Yes, right.
As a Black man living in America, we know firsthand of oppression. And so no matter where the person is in the world, I am against oppression. When it comes to New York politics, and we have to be frank about it, right? So Black people, we do not control our politics in our community. Is always controlled out of outside. And historically in New York State, you're going to have to talk to the people with power. And just like Ron said, the Jewish community in New York State is a very, very powerful political machine, and it's nothing wrong with that, right? You should represent your community, but Black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, if you are together in the community as Muslim people, we all must bring our resources together and control the politics in our community. And I think that brings out a larger discussion. Do we control the politics in our community? I always say, and this is just not just Eric, right? This is for Black politicians all over. If you really want to know who controls your politicians, look who gives them the money. Those are the people that control the politicians. So we have to understand, if we want to control the politics in our neighborhood, we must control the money that goes to the politicians. So I say that to say, what Eric said is politics, and he's a politician. And we have to be, as Black people, we have to start controlling our politicians. We have to start getting political action committees together and raising money, so the politicians that we vote for, they don't have to bow down and cow to other communities and other communities' interests. We have to start doing that.
Okay, now I'm going to politely and brotherly beg to differ with you on the money issue. I am someone who has for a long time been of the view that money has been a long time contaminating, corrupting force within politics. And what we've seen recently, and this should have been, an education for us, is that, there have been a number of very, we use the label progressive, quote unquote, politicians that have come into seats of power on very small shoestring budgets against well situated incumbents who have been in place for decades, for many years, with huge campaign treasuries, and they have been defeated. I mean, one good example in New York is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a young congresswoman that I've got a lot of respect for. But there's been a demonstration of the fact that you can win elections without the contamination of money, just through organizing, just through having a commitment, a vision, and a commitment to that vision. So this is something that I personally advocate. I'm a strong advocate for. But on the issue of Black Americans, and as it relates to this long festering issue of Palestine and Israel, I want to share a piece of history with you, brothers, and with our viewers. This is from November 1st, 1970. I'm just going to share just a part of it, a small portion of it. And inshallah, later on this evening, I'm going to share the document in its entirety through a special presentation. This was titled "An Appeal by Black Americans Against United States Support for the Zionist Government of Israel." This is dated November 1st, 1970. And the list of signatories is very, very impressive. It begins, "We, the Black American signatories of this advertisement, are in complete solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters who, like us, are struggling for self-determination and an end to racist oppression. The recent bloodbath in Jordan, resulting in tens of thousands of dead and wounded Palestinians, would not have been possible without the encouragement, armaments, and financial aid of the United States government. America's support for King Hussein's slaughter of Palestinian refugees and freedom fighters is consistent with its support of reactionary dictatorships throughout the world, from Cambodia and Vietnam to South Africa, Greece, and Iran." And this, they're referring to the Iran before the 1979 revolution. "We stand with the Palestinian peoples in their efforts to preserve their revolution and oppose its attempted destruction by American imperialism aided by Zionists and Arab reactionaries. We state that we are not anti-Jewish, we are anti-Zionist and anti the Zionist state of Israel, the outposts of American imperialism in the Middle East. Zionism is a reactionary racist ideology that justifies the expulsion of the Palestinian people from their homes and lands, and attempts to enlist the Jewish masses of Israel and elsewhere in the service of imperialism to hold back the Middle East revolution." And that's just part of it. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll share the rest of it later. But I wanted to share that with both of you brothers and with the viewing and listening audience, because it serves as a paradigm, a very important paradigm for us, and a litmus test for us as we, strive toward hopefully a more just and equitable America. This is what we desire. And for those of us who are African American, three of us that are connected in this broadcast, and as well as the brother who is one of the two front runners for the mayor's seat. I mean, we are supposed to, and I know the two of you do, based on what you already said, based on what I know about Ron Hampton going back years, and based upon what you just said, Damon Jones, there's a sensitivity for the oppressed, and so we've if he makes it into the mayor's seat, I do hope that brothers like yourselves, who has his ear, will as Malcolm used to say, put a little bug in the ear. You know, I mean,
I was going to tell you, my brother.
Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
Oh no,
go
what
ahead.
I was going to say was, it reminded me of that struggle that we were having with people here in this community who look like us around Terrence Johnson.
That's right.
And you remember those brothers and sisters who said, well, you know, he shot the police. They totally forgot about the police was abusing him.
That's right.
It was a 16-year-old kid who
15. He was 15, Ron. Yes, he did.
That's right, 15 years old, and the police, 2 police officers and the other officers standing around in a room watching them beat this kid, and he feeling fear for his life, got a hold of that gun, and he did exactly what anybody else would have done. He fired the gun.
Exactly.
And then, but they didn't understand that all they wanted to talk about was he shot them. Yeah, he shot him, but what about what prompted him to even find himself in that situation? And it was people who looked like us. I got into a hell of a, excuse the expression, I got into a hell of an argument with members of the local Black Police Association here in Washington. It was all over the papers, all over the TV section. But I refused to yield because that was crazy. I didn't care about being a police. What I cared about was the truth.
That's right.
I cared about the truth, and the truth was that they was beating Terrence, and a 15-year-old kid was afraid and feared his life, and he was wrestling with him and got the gun and fired it. Of course, he shot him. That was the end result. But in order to talk about the end result, you had to talk about why it happened.
That's right.
But for some reason, we couldn't. Some of them couldn't get themselves there. And we see that so many times in these struggles that we had. We are brainwashed by whites and whatever the white issues are, and we just can't do that. We just can't do that. I'm finished with all that. Been finished for a long time. Yeah, I can't go that route, man.
I want to say something. When we support a candidate, any candidate, but especially someone that we've known for years and we believe he's going to do our job, it's our responsibility also, brother.
Oh yeah.
That we have to hold him accountable to do his job. And if he doesn't, and Ron knows me very well, and if he doesn't, he has to be called out on it publicly.
That's right.
Because just like he's representing a group of people, so are we. And putting our name to him and saying that he's going to go in office, he's going to do a good job, he's going to transform this, he's going to change that. And if he doesn't, it's our job to hold him accountable and call him out. If we're going to support you in public, we're going to hold you accountable in public also.
Oh yeah, and look, we'll be up there in front of the mayor's office calling him.
Exactly.
I like him, I respect him, but I'll call him out too.
Exactly. So we have a responsibility also.
That's right.
To make him accountable to what he says, to make him accountable to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And we're going to do that.
Yeah.
That's without a doubt.
Yeah.
Okay. In the lead up to the next question, I want to just give some of our viewers around the world, especially in South Africa and the United States, who are not familiar with the name Terrence Johnson, some context for, this, what you've heard already about Terrence Johnson in the case. Terrence Johnson was a 15-year-old boy, a 15-year-old Black boy out of Prince George's County, Maryland, who had never been in any trouble in his life. He was an honor roll student. Never gave his parents any problem. In a 2-parent family, I mean, he and his brother, he and an older brother had gone out to the drive-in theater. His brother was driving his father's car, and a part of the narrative was that the car had been driven without the father's permission. They decided to go to a drive-in theater, and the reason why the car should not have been driven is because the tags on it were expired. So they stopped at a convenience store to get candy and stuff for the drive-in theater. They got back on the road. I think it was 202, and they, I guess it was brightly enough lit that the brother didn't realize he had forgotten to turn the headlights on. So they ended up getting pulled over by a Prince George's County police officer. And when the officer did his routine check, I guess, of the vehicle and what have you, and you know, and also decided to place Terrence's brother under arrest for driving a car with expired tags. I don't think he was under arrest, but they were going to take the vehicle. Right. When they found these tools, there were tools on the back seat of the vehicle, and near where he was pulled over, there was, I guess, an apartment complex where some laundromat machines had been broken into or something. Anyway, the bottom line was this white police officer suspected them of maybe having committed a criminal offense. No evidence, just suspicion. Took them to the police station. Terrence, given that he was a juvenile, his parents should have been called immediately to come and pick him up. Instead, what they did was they put the Terrence's brother in a cell, and they began to interrogate Terrence. They handcuffed him to a chair and began to berate him. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, so he was responding in a rather kind of, you know, taking his time to respond and maybe being viewed as flippant. And one of the officers, Claggett, belonging to a family with deep roots, going all the way back to, you know, the days of enslavement in Prince George's County, decided that he was going to take Terrence and teach him a lesson. So he, you know, Terrence was maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. Right. Claggett was this big, over 6 foot officer, just told him to take the handcuffs off of him, and he picked him up from the back of his collar and threw him into the room where they do the fingerprinting and what have you. And then the next thing you heard was Terrence screaming out because of the way that he was being abused in that room. Mm-hmm. The way Terrence described it in his testimony, it was at one point as he was being beaten, he wrapped his arms around Claggett's waist, trying to smother the blows. And when he wrapped his arms around his waist, his hand, unbeknownst to him, settled on the handle of Claggett's gun. And when Claggett kneed him, he kneed him with such force that as Terrence went back, the gun was literally ripped out of his holster. Mm-hmm. And Terrence ended up, pulling the trigger. And the folks that were outside of that room, they said initially none of the officers moved, because they were under the impression that Claggett had done what a number of other Prince George's County police officers had done. Wow. Just shot another black boy. And that's right. But when Terrence opened the door, terrified, he opened the door. I mean, that's when pandemonium broke loose out in the outside, and shots were fired. What's ended up saving Terrence was that he ran into a door, fell to the floor, and that's when the officers pounced on him. And he was then arrested for having shot an officer. But before everything had ended, a second officer by the name of Swart had also been shot. So two officers were shot and killed. The second officer was shot and killed according to the testimonies, by friendly fire.
Mm-hmm.
By friendly fire. But Terrence ended up being charged with the murder of both of these officers, and a mixed jury, if you remember, Ron, a mixed jury of blacks and whites in Prince George's County, Maryland, back in the 70s, in the late 70s, they ended up arriving at a compromised verdict because the government was pushing, murder, which would have, and they had charged Terrence as an adult, even though he was 15 years of age.
That's right. They
charged him as an adult. In fact, he might have been the first case of a juvenile charge as an adult for that charge. If he had been found guilty, he would have gone to the electric chair in Maryland. But instead, this jury, mixed jury, arrived at a compromised verdict and found him guilty of illegal use of a handgun and involuntary manslaughter. Mm-hmm. And he got a 25-year sentence, which was the max the judge could give him. And this was back at a time when the Prince George's County Police Department had the reputation, and they took pride in the reputation of being one of the most racist and brutal police departments in the country.
That's right.
So that is the context for Terrence Johnson. But since Terrence Johnson, we have had so many other cases, and what I'd like to do in the closing minutes of this broadcast, I'd like for both of you brothers, especially given the amount of years and of service and activism the two of you have had in trying to bring about positive reform in the way that policing is done, in the way that this criminal justice system apparatus functions at all levels. And I understand that you, Brother Jones, that you are also, you're part of a police lobby. Are you part of a police lobby or a benevolent association that does lobbying?
Yeah.
So
I'm a union member. Yeah, I'm still working.
Yes. Okay. So I'd like for both of you to weigh in on, the way policing has been done historically in this country, especially as it pertains to Black and brown folk. The African American and Latino and other non-white factor in the way policing has been done and is being done. I should also note that I remember Terrence saying that when this happened to him, he remembered looking up when they were on top of him and beating him. There was one black officer, and he said the officer just turned away. There was only one black officer in that. I don't know if just one in the department or just one present at that time, but he just turned and looked away. And what we know is that, sorry to say that, we have what I used to call the Boys in the Hood syndrome. If you remember the movie Boys in the Hood, the black officer, one of the black officers was even more vicious than the white officers were against, the black youth. And we have that mentality within the ranks of policing in America, and they are part of the problem as well. Where do you see, especially with everything that has happened over the past year, where do you see reform going, and what role do you see Black and other non-white police officers playing in the possibility of substantive reform taking place?
Yeah. Well, I'm optimistic, and I remain optimistic, but it's a lot of work yet to be done. We are nowhere near, even with cities like New York, states like Colorado, states like New Mexico. They have come up with some new legislative responses to the police violence that's taking place on and in our community. It's yet to be seen. I don't, there's a lot of action. I was asked this question by someone from the print media, and all of a sudden there's a lot of action going on, and it is a lot of things are going on, a lot of things are happening, but we haven't seen enough results yet to really determine what's going to, you know, what good is it going to be. And we had to take in consideration the option from the police union, the FOP, all of those organizations. We need to take in consideration the opposition from the traditional police associations, like the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Police Executive Research Forum. And I mean, not that they support brutality and racism, because I don't think they do, but they think change ought to take place in some kind of slow motion kind of fashion, because it has to be grounded in something. And if that's the case, then all we're doing is tinkling around the edges of what's going on rather than doing it. See, I subscribe to the notion that sometimes you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, not literally, but figuratively. We do. We need to start all over again. And I'm not opposed. And I've come to this now as a result of over 40-some years of doing this work. I'm not opposed to abolition of the police. I'm really not, because it gives us an opportunity to start all over again and do some analysis around whether or not what they did and what they're doing, does it work? You know, why should we continue to do something over and over again and not and get the same results, which doesn't do anything for us? So if abolishment means that we're going to now have a new chance at doing something that's going to really work, then, you know, I'm not opposed to abolishment. I'm definitely not opposed to it, because reform hasn't worked. Reform has not worked. We've been talking, originally, in essence, Moray, we've been talking about this for over 40 years. Mm. And in your mind, what have we seen in 40 years? Over 40 years, we just haven't seen it. So it's a lot of action, a lot of things going on, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that we're going to see some results, but the results haven't started to take place yet. And we've had a lot of good talk from people, and Damon and I both have served on some of these reform commissions and task force and all of that. Mm-hmm. We have seen the willingness on the part of our people, community people, to talk about community control of the police, to talk about reform, comprehensive reform. But to say that it has happened already or it's happening, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet at all.
Thanks. Ron, listen, Ron has such a deep history in police reform. You know, I remember Ron when I started in 1992, National Black Police Association. I was 23 years old and seeing Ron do his thing. That's how long this been going on, man. And let me tell you, when I got in the National Black Police Association, it felt like freedom was around the corner, right? I'm like, man, I'm in this organization, man, and oh man, we gonna do it. 30 years later, I'm still fighting with Ron. Right? So we got to understand something, and you know, and it's a blessing to be on an international show that Black officers are outnumbered, and a lot of them are scared. I'm going to say this again. Yeah. Black officers are outnumbered, and a lot of them are scared. They are scared to speak their mind. They are scared to be Black. This culture of policing erases you from being Black. And they say we're all blue, but that's a lot of BS. Yes. Right? Because we are still Black people, and a lot of us forget that. My wife is a detective in Mount Vernon, New York. I come from a law enforcement family. On both sides of my family, and we understand that racism racism exists. Black officers are cultural conditioned. And that's why the brother can say, you see some black officers are harder on black people than the white officer because they trying to show that they could fit in. But when you're black, you get labeled as a racist. How am I labeled as a racist just because I love black people and I see myself as black before blue? Black politicians are scared too. They're scared to actually push police reform because they don't want to be labeled anti-police or anti-law enforcement, even though, right, the voters are the one that put you in, right? The police officers, you know, get their salary from the taxpayers, but we don't recognize that, and we don't look at that. So to move forward, we have to really understand that the police work for us. We have to really try to empower a lot of black officers in these police departments. And we also got to hold black politicians accountable. See, I'm in Westchester County, New York, one of the richest counties in America. And we have 43 police departments, and this is in New York now. We have 43 police departments. Only one police department has a black commissioner. So you have 42 police departments, never seen a black commissioner. And we got black people all around. We got black people. We got black politicians that won't appoint a black commissioner. We got to think about that. See, a lot of the things that we're doing to ourselves, and then we wonder why young black men and women are still being killed by police. A lot of it is our politicians' fault. Because they don't want to have the testicular fortitude to stand up and be black and put qualified black people in positions that's going to change. Right. So we have to be able to call it for what it is. We got to start empowering black officers, because let me tell you, there's a lot of good black officers out there that know how to police their community, but they're not given the chance because there's nothing but white commissioners and white people in charge of these police departments put there by black politicians. So there has to be some change, and it has to start somewhere, but we got to empower the people so they understand.
Ron, Washington, D.C. has a black mayor, and she's not the first. Have you seen any significant impact, positive impact, that this black mayor has had on policing for the city of Washington, D.C., especially as it relates to issues of accountability, police community relations, etc., with her constituents?
My brother, this mayor is not Marion Barry. And Marion Barry will always be my mayor. She is not Marion Barry. She has been someone who has sought out white and have a large number of whites that work with her and for her. And in some ways, that's disappointing to me, because there are qualified black folk. And let me give you an example. Damon raised the issue about the mayor appoints the police chief. When she first came in, she appointed Kathy Lanier, a white woman. Now, and I'm not against women. There was black women who was available. She appoints Kathy Lanier. Kathy Lanier decided that she's going to leave and go to the NFL head of security for the NFL. There's a white guy that was selected as the chief of police, Newsom. And he came on the department in 1987. I remember him, not very much, but I remember when he came on, wasn't nothing special about him. But there was a black guy who was more than qualified for chief of police when she chose Newsom. As a matter of fact, he could have been selected chief of police when she chose Kathy Lanier. The fact that the guy that's the chief of police now, Conti, he was he's probably had more experience as being a police person and police leader than all of the people that we've had in the last two leaderships. But the mayor, like white people. So we've had white women and a white man. Now we have Conti, who is black, and he's finally the chief of police. And I think he's going to do well. He was born and raised right here in Washington, D.C., up there in Langston. By his own admission, his mother and father was involved in some of the drug stuff that was going on then. He's done served in probably every significant part of the police department, so he has a variety of experiences. And just by fact that he wants to talk about as a foundation his life, his community, the things that launched him into what it is that he's doing now, I think says something about his intent and his commitment to making some changes in the city. He has also spoken to and about some of the things that I've had the honor and pleasure of serving on the DC Police Reform Commission, and he's looked at and read the commission's recommendations, and he agrees with them. Maybe not all of them, but he agrees with them. And so I think that in the long run, we're going to see the kind of police chief we used to have back when I was a police officer. And that really makes a difference. And I'm optimistic about it. But this mayor, again, she's no Marion Barry. Okay. And she's shown that she has a propensity and a likeness for whites. And maybe that's all right with her. But, you know, black folks still represent a narrow majority of the people who live in this city. And I think there's plenty of black leadership, not only just in policing, but across the spectrum of our government. And I get disappointed in some of the things that's going on. She has been, and I'll end with this, in my opinion, she has been one of the main factors in support of gentrification in the city, because they feel like, you know, the advent of more whites and gentrification means an economic boom for the city. Well, you know what? Black folk want to be involved in economic boom. They want businesses. They want to do well, and they are doing well. But you have to also feel a need and a desire to also lay some groundwork so that they can come open up businesses and do other things in the city. I know that we have just gone through COVID, but still black folk lost businesses and they would like to reopen those businesses and do well in them too.
Okay, brothers, this is going to have to be the last question. And I'm going to ask both of you to be brief because we are already at that 1 hour cutoff.
Right.
We gotta alhamdulillah, this has been a thought-provoking discussion, and we're gonna have you back. We're gonna have both of you back. I want to end with this question, and it's more of a statement. I want you to finish the statement. Eric Adams, if you successfully become the mayor of New York, you finish it. Your message to Eric Adams, should he become mayor of New York? If you become mayor of New York, finish it, Brother Damon Jones.
Do right by the people or we'll be calling you out. We'll be right back on this show calling you out.
Okay, Brother Ron, what say you?
What say me? If it was me, what I would ask him to do is do a thorough analysis of where and what he has in the city, and then begin to make the changes that going to benefit black folk and poor folk and brown folk in the city, people who have been traditionally and historically locked out. Do it, and then do it with the gusto that needs to be done, and we'll support you for that.
Okay, and on that note, I want to thank both of you brothers.
Thank you,
Ron Hampton and Damon Jones. You have a promise from me that if Almighty God allows breath to remain in my body, we're going to have a revisit of this discussion. And I'm going to be looking forward to it. Meanwhile, you all continue to do the great work that you have been doing, and you know, may the good Lord, who is known by many different names in many different cultures around the world, bless each of us, those of us who are sincere, truly sincere, about wanting this country to live up to the better part of itself. May the Almighty bless us to be significant factors in that transformational change. On that note, I want to thank you. Peace be unto you.
Peace.
Both.
Peace.
And to our listening and viewing audience, we want to end the broadcast as we normally do with a prayer. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu solihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Which means, in translation, in the name of Allah, in the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.